The hum of the bustling airport filled the air with a mixture of voices, rolling suitcases, and boarding calls. For James Carter, a 35-year-old financial consultant, this trip was meant to be more than just another business flight. It was a rare chance to pause. For years, James had worked tirelessly, climbing from long nights of study and sacrifice to a career that kept him traveling across cities, sometimes countries, leaving little time for himself. When his company upgraded him to a first-class ticket, he felt a small surge of pride. It wasn't just about the extra legroom or champagne, it was the symbolism. To James, sitting in first class was a reminder of how far he had come, from a childhood where money was scarce and opportunities scarcer, raised by a single mother who juggled multiple jobs just to put food on the table. This moment was her victory as much as his. He slid into the wide leather seat, adjusting his jacket and letting himself sink into comfort. Around him, first-class passengers spoke in hushed, relaxed tones, ordering drinks and scrolling through their phones. For once, James allowed himself to breathe without worry. As the boarding process continued, his eyes drifted to the narrow aisles separating first class from economy. The steady line of passengers filing in reminded him of how many times he had been back there, squeezed between strangers, knees pressed against the seat in front, counting every minute until landing. Today, he thought, things were different. Today, he was here. But just as he began to settle, a new sound cut through the calm, the unmistakable cries of a baby. His head turned toward the commotion. A young woman struggled to juggle a diaper bag, a stroller folded awkwardly, and an infant wailing in her arms. Other passengers looked away, some annoyed, others sympathetic, but no one moved to help. James watched her, a flicker of recognition stirring in him. Something about her exhaustion reminded him of his mother in those difficult years. He didn't know it yet, but his comfortable first-class seat was about to become the least important thing in his world. The young mother's struggle seemed to stretch endlessly down the aisle. Her infant wailed louder with every step, tiny fists clenched, red-faced from exhaustion. She whispered soothing words, bouncing the child gently against her shoulder, but nothing worked. The diaper bag slid repeatedly off her arm, and the folded stroller kept bumping against seats as she tried to maneuver through the cramped space. Passengers exchanged glances, some offering sympathetic smiles, others rolling their eyes. A man in a business suit sighed dramatically, shifting uncomfortably as though the baby's cries were a personal attack. A teenager popped in earbuds to drown out the sound. The flight attendant smiled politely but didn't intervene. Protocol required them to stay near the aisles and assist only when asked. For the mother, whose name was Maria, the world seemed to shrink into a blur of disapproval and fatigue. She had been traveling for hours already, with a connecting flight ahead of her, and the weight of single motherhood pressed heavier with every second. Since her husband's sudden passing the year before, every task had felt like climbing a mountain alone. This trip was meant to be a small escape, a chance to visit family who promised to help her heal. But instead, she felt like a burden, a spectacle of failure, as her baby's cries filled the cabin. She finally reached her assigned seat in economy, far back near the restroom. It was cramped, narrow, and suffocating. She sank into the chair, clutching her baby close, tears threatening to fall. She whispered to herself, "Just hold on. Just hold on," as if the words alone might stop her breaking point from spilling over. What Maria didn't realize was that someone was watching her from the front of the plane. Someone whose heart, stirred by memories of his own mother's silent battles, would make a decision that would change the course of both their lives. James shifted in his plush first-class seat, trying to focus on the complimentary drink the attendant had just placed in front of him. But his eyes kept drifting back to the mother in economy, her face drawn with fatigue, her baby's cries echoing faintly even through the curtains separating the cabins. He told himself it wasn't his problem. He had earned this seat, the comfort, the quiet, the recognition of his hard work. For once, he didn't have to carry someone else's burdens. Yet the longer he sat there, the more the image of the woman struggling alone gnawed at him. A memory rose unbidden, his own mother on a crowded bus, holding his little sister while lugging groceries, sweat dripping down her brow as strangers looked on in silence. He remembered how helpless he had felt as a boy, wishing someone, anyone, would step in and ease her struggle. No one ever had. James set his glass down, his chest tight with conflict. What if he offered her his seat? The thought startled him. Giving up first class for economy? After all these years of sacrifice? But then another thought followed. What good was success if he couldn't use it to make someone else's load lighter? He stood slowly, feeling the weight of his decision. Other passengers watched him with curiosity as he walked toward the back, his tall frame moving past rows of surprised faces. When he reached Maria's row, he bent slightly, his voice gentle. "Excuse me, ma'am," he said. "Would you like to switch seats with me? You and your baby might be more comfortable up front." Maria blinked, stunned. For a moment, she thought she had misheard. Around her, passengers stared, their expressions a mix of admiration and disbelief. Her lips parted, trembling. I couldn't possibly." But James smiled warmly, already reaching for her bag. "Please. Let me do this." In that instant, the decision was made. A single act of kindness would ripple outward in ways neither of them could imagine. Maria's hands trembled as she gathered her things, still in disbelief that a stranger, this tall, soft-spoken man, was offering her something so precious. The flight attendant, who had been glancing nervously at the crying baby minutes earlier, now stepped forward, smiling warmly. "Right this way, ma'am," she said, almost as if proud of James's decision. Maria rose slowly, careful not to jostle her daughter. The baby, sensing her mother's calmer energy, quieted slightly, hiccuping against her shoulder. As she passed through the narrow aisle toward first class, passengers murmured, their expressions softening. Some nodded at James in quiet approval, while others looked away, perhaps a little ashamed they hadn't acted first. When Maria reached the spacious seat James had surrendered, she lowered herself into the soft leather with a sigh of relief. The extra space felt like heaven after the cramped rows of economy. She nestled her daughter against her chest, rocking her gently, and for the first time since boarding, Maria felt tears sting her eyes, not from exhaustion, but from overwhelming gratitude. She looked back toward James, who was now making his way to her former seat. He didn't seem resentful, in fact, he smiled faintly, as if a weight had lifted from him. Their eyes met for a brief moment, and Maria mouthed, "Thank you." The words weren't nearly enough, but they carried all the sincerity she could muster. As the plane lifted off, Maria couldn't stop replaying the moment in her head. She had been on the verge of breaking down completely, drowning in fatigue and loneliness. Yet a stranger had seen her struggle and stepped forward when no one else did. She gently kissed her daughter's forehead and whispered, "There are still good people in this world, sweetheart. And today, we found one." For Maria, the flight was no longer just about getting from one place to another. It was about an act of kindness that had reached her at her lowest point, restoring hope she hadn't realized she'd lost. And for James, the soft smile lingering on her face was worth far more than any first-class seat could ever be. The plane had settled into its steady rhythm, the white noise of engines humming beneath the muted conversations of passengers. Maria, finally breathing easier, watched her daughter drift into a peaceful sleep in her arms. She glanced back toward economy, curiosity tugging at her. James sat upright in her old cramped seat, his long legs folded uncomfortably, but he wore no sign of regret. When the seatbelt sign flickered off, Maria couldn't stop herself. She pressed the call button, asked the attendant if she could speak to the man who had given her his seat, and moments later, James was invited to first class, not to sit, but just to talk. He arrived with a modest smile, towering slightly in the aisle, and said softly, "I just wanted to make sure you two were doing okay." Maria's voice broke slightly. "We are better than okay, thanks to you. I don't even know how to begin to thank you." James waved it off. "You don't need to. I saw you struggling. I've been in situations where I wished someone would step in. It just felt right." The simplicity of his words struck her. He wasn't trying to play the hero. He had simply chosen kindness. They spoke quietly, careful not to disturb the sleeping baby. Maria shared how she was traveling alone for the first time since her husband's sudden passing the year before. The trip was supposed to be a fresh start, but it had only magnified her loneliness until James's act of compassion shifted everything. James listened intently, his eyes reflecting understanding. In turn, he told her how he had grown up in a small town, raised by a single mother who worked herself to exhaustion. "I guess I see her in you," he admitted softly. "Strong, doing it all on your own." The cabin seemed to shrink as their words connected them across different worlds. Maria's gratitude deepened, not just for the seat, but for the conversation that reminded her she wasn't invisible, that her struggles mattered. As James returned to economy, Maria thought to herself that sometimes, unlikely conversations with strangers carry the power to heal wounds no one else can see. Hours into the flight, the hum of the engines and the dimmed cabin lights created a cocoon of quiet. Most passengers dozed in their seats, flight attendants moved discreetly, and the baby in Maria's arms slept soundly. Yet Maria found herself wide awake, her mind lingering on James, the stranger who had altered the course of her day with one selfless choice. When James walked past first class on his way to stretch his legs, Maria caught his eye again. She gestured to the empty seat beside her, silently inviting him to sit. He hesitated at first, but her warm smile eased the awkwardness, and soon he settled next to her, careful not to disturb the child. Their conversation picked up where it had left off, but this time it dug deeper. James shared stories about his mother, a woman who worked night shifts as a nurse while raising him and his two siblings. "She used to tell me, kindness is never wasted, son. Even if no one notices, God does." His voice softened, and Maria could hear the weight of those words shaping the man before her. Maria, in turn, spoke about her late husband. "He was the strong one," she confessed. "The one who always made me feel like everything was going to be okay. When I lost him, I thought I lost that anchor forever." Her eyes welled with tears, but she quickly blinked them away. James didn't rush to fill the silence. Instead, he let the stillness hold their shared vulnerability. Then, gently, he said, "Maybe you didn't lose the anchor. Maybe you just became it." The words sank into Maria like sunlight breaking through clouds. She looked at him, truly looked, and saw not just a kind stranger but someone who carried empathy carved by hardship. By the time James rose to return to his seat, something unspoken had formed between them. It wasn't romantic, not yet. It was something purer, a recognition of shared resilience, of two souls meeting in the quiet spaces of loss and kindness. For Maria, it was the first time in months she felt lighter. And for James, it was the first time in years he felt seen. As the captain announced their descent, a stir rippled through the cabin. Window shades lifted, sunlight streamed in, and the once sleeping passengers began preparing for arrival. Maria adjusted her daughter, who stirred but didn't cry, thanks to the peaceful rest the spacious seat had afforded her. James, returning from economy for a quick word before landing, found Maria waiting for him with the same warm smile she'd worn throughout their unexpected connection. "We're almost there," he said lightly, though his tone carried something heavier, an awareness that this shared journey was nearing its end. Maria nodded, tightening the baby's blanket. "I don't know how to explain this, James, but you've made this flight so much more than I expected. I was dreading every minute of it, and somehow, it became bearable. Even good." James smiled, rubbing the back of his neck in his humble way. "You gave me something too, Maria. A reminder that the smallest choices matter. I didn't just give up a seat, I gained a conversation that'll stay with me." The plane touched down smoothly, wheels screeching as it slowed along the runway. Passengers clapped, a tradition that made them both chuckle, but as people stood and pulled down luggage, reality loomed. Soon, they would each go their separate ways. As they shuffled into the terminal, Maria carried her daughter while James walked alongside her, instinctively keeping close as though protective. At baggage claim, they lingered, hesitant to let the moment fade into the ordinary chaos of arrivals and departures. Maria turned to him, her eyes shining. "I don't know if we'll ever cross paths again, but I want you to know, you changed something in me today. And for that, you'll always have my gratitude." James's expression softened. "Maybe this doesn't have to be goodbye." He pulled a small notepad from his bag and scribbled his number, handing it to her. For when you need a reminder that you're stronger than you think, or even just a friend to talk to. Maria tucked it carefully into her purse. For the first time in a long while, the future didn't seem so daunting. The flight had ended, but something else had quietly begun. The terminal bustled with the noise of rolling suitcases, hurried footsteps, and joyful reunions. Yet, for Maria, the world seemed to blur. She stood with her daughter nestled against her, the slip of paper with James's number tucked safely in her purse, and a tug in her chest she couldn't ignore. As James turned to leave, blending into the stream of passengers heading toward the exit, Maria's heart raced. She called out, her voice trembling but firm. "James!" He stopped instantly, turning with that familiar gentle smile. She walked toward him, clutching her daughter tighter as if the baby were her courage. I need to say something before you go," she began, her voice quivering. James waited patiently, his eyes encouraging her to continue. "When you gave up your seat, it wasn't just kindness. It felt like, for the first time since my husband passed, I wasn't alone. You didn't just help me, James. You reminded me what it feels like to be seen, to be cared for." Her cheeks flushed, but she pressed on. "I don't know if this sounds crazy, but I think I needed you more than I realized. And I'm grateful beyond words." For a moment, James was silent, his expression caught between surprise and quiet understanding. Then he stepped closer, lowering his voice. "Maria, that doesn't sound crazy at all. Life has a way of putting people in the right place at the right time. Maybe this was one of those moments." The heaviness in her chest lifted. Maria hadn't planned to confess the depth of her feelings, but speaking them aloud felt liberating. James's calm acceptance reassured her this connection was real, no matter how brief their time together had been. As they parted again, something had shifted. Gratitude had grown into something deeper, a spark of possibility neither of them could ignore. In the weeks that followed the flight, Maria found herself replaying the moments with James over and over, the quiet conversation, his steady presence, and the unshakable kindness that had touched her so deeply. She hadn't expected to hear from him, but one evening, her phone lit up with a simple message, just checking in. "How are you and the little one?" Her heart skipped. That message opened the door to something neither of them had anticipated. Texts turned into calls, and calls into long, heartfelt conversations that stretched late into the night. James learned about the little details of Maria's life, the lullabies she sang, the challenges of single motherhood, the way grief sometimes crept back in at odd hours. In return, Maria discovered the quiet resilience James carried, the humor he used to soften pain, and the unwavering compassion that seemed to guide him through life. They met again, this time without the rush of airports or the hum of engines. At a small cafe near Maria's home, James cradled her daughter as if he had known her forever. Maria watched them, her heart swelling with something she hadn't dared to feel since her husband's death, hope for a new beginning. Looking back, she realized love doesn't always arrive with fireworks or grand gestures. Sometimes, it begins in the cramped aisle of an airplane, with one stranger's decision to give up a seat. Sometimes, love is born from kindness, patience, and the courage to connect. As James reached across the table and gently took Maria's hand, she felt it fully for the first time. Their journey together had started 30,000 feet in the air, but it was only just beginning on the ground. What began as a fleeting act of compassion had become a story of healing, second chances, and the kind of love that changes everything.